Hello everyone, good evening. So welcome to the Sustaining Our Shores Honors Colloquium. I'm very happy to welcome you all to the University of Rhode Island on this chilly November evening. I hope you all had a lovely Thanksgiving and you're ready for our second to last event. My name is Andrew Davis. I'm one of the co-lead organizers with J.P. Walsh of the Colloquium this fall, a faculty member in the Department of Biological Sciences at URI. A committee of faculty and staff has planned the Sustaining Our Shores Honors Colloquium to educate and encourage discussion and collaboration regarding the coastal ecosystems of Rhode Island. Once again, we thank the honors team of Lynn, Anna, and Deb for their fabulous organization of the finer points of the colloquium, and also for all of our students that have engaged with this process of talking about the issues surrounding our coast. So before I get into tonight's program, I want to thank everyone for attending, but I also want to thank you for remaining to wear your mask appropriately during the event whilst indoors. Please note that the fire escapes are at the sides of the building and back through the main way. The restrooms are back where you entered the building. And I also want to make you aware, as shown at the top of the PowerPoint display, is that next week is our final presentation, which will be an event on December 7th by Wallace J. Nichols, an internationally renowned author and acclaimed water warrior, who's going to lecture on an ocean state of mind in crisis opportunity. It's going to be a great event to close the Honors Colloquium this fall. To provide tonight's land acknowledgement, we welcome Natonis Baker, a member of the Narragansett tribe, the indigenous people of the land now called Rhode Island. In 2018, she attended a cultural exchange program through Aquarium, studying marine life along with the Mashantucket, Pequot, and Alaskan Native students. In 2019, she completed the Brown University pre-college program for environmental leadership. Natonis is currently a freshman at the University of Rhode Island, majoring in marine biology, and I'm very proud to say Natonis is one of my students in one of my classes. And Natonis has been working with people at URI since June 2021, supporting graduate students and faculty with research projects around Narragansett Bay. So please join me in welcoming Natonis to the stage.
Hello, my name is Natonis, and I'm going to be giving this land acknowledgement. So, hello, my name is Natonis Anakwas Baker. I am a 19-year-old member of the Narragansett Nation. I go to school here at URI, the homelands of my people, and I am majoring in marine biology. In this field of study, I hope to aid in the research of solutions to climate change and to help animals that have been injured by humans directly or indirectly. I have been coming to URI Kingston campus and Bay campus since I was a child because my father works here. As a child, me, my mom, and my brother would drive down to meet my father and have lunch with him. I've always been drawn to the water, so my favorite place to be was at Bay campus, right next to the ocean. My family always taught us the importance of the waters and how it sustains us. We were taught to fish and shellfish. My summers always consisted of going cod-hogging and or crabbing with my family. As Indigenous people, water is an important part of our culture and way of life. Our people knew to take care of the earth and waters as they took care of us. Our people knew not to overfish or overhunt, only taking what they needed to support their families. They would use every part of what they caught. Our people respected and loved the earth as it was our mother, a protector and a provider. I hope that the people today will understand what my people did, and that it's not too late to save our Mother Earth together as a united front. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Natonis. So tonight, we're turning our focus back again onto plastic pollution, following on from Chelsea Rockman's presentation 2 weeks ago. I'm not going to say too much more about this theme tonight because I'm going to allow our panel to take center stage on this issue. But I shall introduce our moderator, Dr. Peter Snyder. Dr. Snyder served as the Vice President for Research and Economic Development at URI. He is also a professor of biomedical and pharmaceutical sciences in the College of Pharmacy. Dr. Snyder oversees the research mission of the university, and he simultaneously maintains a robust research program centered on biomarker development for detection of Alzheimer's disease in pre-symptomatic individuals. Above all of that, over the last 2 years, Dr. Snyder has spearheaded the establishment of URI's first university-wide signature research initiative, branded as a co-laboratory, or co-lab for short. It means laboratory without walls. The Plastics Land to Sea co-lab now involves the efforts of nearly 50 faculty across 6 of URI's colleges. It has approximately $8 million of external funding. The Plastics co-lab, based out of URI's Coastal Institute, will broaden participation across the university, engage our citizenry as active partners, seek meaningful partnership both domestically and internationally, and will focus on applying core strengths of university to identify innovative technological, chemical, engineering, public, and policy, regulatory, educational solutions to slow the pace of human contamination of the world's oceans. So we hope the co-lab will become a beacon of light and as we research plastic pollution within Rhode Island. Dr. Snyder, please join me. And please welcome Dr. Snyder to the stage. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. And for those of you who are interested in our collab for the Plastics Land to Sea initiative, we just launched a new website a couple weeks ago. It's plastics.uri.edu. And if you go to that website, you'll see all that this university is doing and striving to do to really work to improve the human contamination of all of our waterways by plastics at the macro level through to, nanoplastics. We are committed to this topic, and that's evidenced by tonight's program. So welcome, and I first want to congratulate and thank Professors Walsh, Davies, Derbyshire, and the entire committee who put this wonderful honors colloquium program together this semester. It's been brilliant and so poignant and timely. Welcome, everybody. So it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's panel. First, I'd like to start by, what I'm going to do is just introduce everybody, ask them to come up, and then we'll begin with some questions. So we have tonight, first, Dr. Kara Lavender Law, a wonderful friend of this university, someone we've relied on actually for her advice as we designed and then launched the collaboratory. Dr. Law is a research professor of oceanography at the Sea Education Association in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. She is a world expert in studying the sources, distribution, transformation, and fate of plastic debris in our world's oceans. Dr. Law serves on the U.S. National Academy's Committee on U.S. Contributions to Global Ocean Plastic Waste. She is the vice chair of the Scientific Committee on Oceanographic Research Working Group, and the working group is the Floating Litter and its Oceanic Transport Analysis and Modeling, which goes by the acronym FLOTSAM, which has got to be one of the best acronyms I've ever heard of for this. She served as the co-principal investigator of the Marine Debris Working Group at the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis, and we are very fortunate to have her here tonight. Eva Touhey currently works as the program manager at Clean Ocean Access, an environmental nonprofit located in Middletown, Rhode Island. Eva received her Master's of Arts in Marine Affairs here at URI, studying the influence of plastic bags on pro-environmental behaviors in Rhode Island coastal communities. Eva has worked at Clean Ocean Access since 2015 and oversees the founding programs on eliminating marine debris, improving water quality, and protecting shoreline access, and we are happy to have her tonight as well. Michaela Cashman is a biologist at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Atlantic Coastal Environmental Sciences Division in Narragansett, Rhode Island. The EPA has a campus, one of its major campuses, right off our Bay campus, and we work very closely with them. Michaela's research focuses on contaminants of emerging concern with an emphasis on man-made chemicals in marine environments. One aspect of Michaela's research is one of the first attempts to characterize microplastics on the floor of Narragansett Bay. Michaela is also a Ph.D. candidate back here at URI in the Department of Geosciences. Finally, Dr. Anna Robuck, one of our star graduates, is an environmental chemist and oceanographer who studies chemical and plastic pollution in natural and human environments. Her current work seeks to measure plastic and plastic-derived chemicals in a range of human tissues using advanced mass spectroscopy, and she is a research fellow in high-resolution exposomics at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York City. She earned her Ph.D. in oceanography in 2020 from our Graduate School of Oceanography at URI, during which she orchestrated a large-scale necropsy and analysis program to assess the occurrence of ingested micro and mesoplastics in the Massachusetts Bay seabirds over time. Really brilliant work. So with those introductions, I'd like to welcome our four panelists to the stage. And while you're getting seated, I will pose the first question. So I will ask each of you in turn to respond to these questions, and I'll start with Kara, since she's sitting right where I'll be sitting. I'd like each of you in just a few words, 1 or 2 or 3 words, to describe the state of your thoughts with respect to plastics contamination here in the Northeast, and why we, as New Englanders and residents in the Northeast, why should we be concerned? Kara?
Thank you. Well, first, I would just like to say thank you to the University of Rhode Island and the Colloquium organizers, to everybody for a really warm welcome and an engaging afternoon, especially chatting with the students in the program. So a couple words. The words I would use to describe this is wicked challenge. And I use the word challenge deliberately instead of problem because I think we need to acknowledge that we are all entirely reliant upon plastics to live our daily lives, especially in this time of a global pandemic, but even before then, we really, if you ever do the little exercise of writing down everything that is made of plastic as you go throughout your day, you'll realize that that is the case. But we do have a problem in that there is way too much plastic in our environment. And so trying to reconcile those two pieces is a challenge.
Thank you. Michaela?
Hi, can you hear me okay? Is that better? Okay. Thank you for having me here tonight. I think if I had to choose one word, it would probably be ubiquitous. As our research advances and our ability to detect plastics in the ocean gets better and better, we're able to detect smaller and smaller pieces of plastic. And we're at this point now where we no longer ask the question, is there plastic here or there? The answer is always yes. Everywhere we look, we see plastic. It's completely ubiquitous in the environment.
Anna. Pull it towards you. There you go.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So I guess building upon the thoughts that have already been established, challenge, ubiquitous, but I'd also add that innovation comes to mind when I think about plastic pollution in New England, in that we have such opportunity to conduct innovative research as URI is pushing at this moment. We have economic innovation opportunities to look beyond and find what is going to be the solution to this challenge. We also have human health innovation to think about. We can prevent exposure to these materials and improve our own health and innovate on that front. So while it's a terrible challenge that we need to navigate in a lot of different fronts, we can do so in ways that better our quality of life and environmental quality as well.
And Michaela.
Hello. All right. When I think about this question, what comes to mind from my own experiences working at Clean Ocean Access is single use and or litter, if we're counting single use to be one word. So one of the things that I see personally, but also professionally, that most of the plastic pollution that I see on our coastline is actually made up of single-use, low-value litter material. And I think that is one of the most pervasive issues amongst plastic pollution that I am working on in my professional work. So,
Eva, sticking with you for a moment, are there areas within the Northeast coastline, special communities, populations that you think are most vulnerable, and how do you think this is going to be changing over time? How do you see this problem escalating, and where are we heading?
sure. So just for some context, my experience and area of focus is Aquidneck Island and Connecticut Island, which is Jamestown. So the things that I've seen and the data that we have collected are hyper-focused to those locations, so I can't speak to the broader Rhode Island community and also all of New England. But I think one of the most vulnerable areas is having everybody in the community understand the impact of plastic pollution on our coastline. So it's starting with this education and awareness and outreach to community members of all socioeconomic statuses, because I think the first solution everyone thinks of is we need to use reusables, we need to reuse our materials, but if that is not available and that mindset, it doesn't come firsthand, then we need to make that available and share those experiences. So,
Michaela, I'm wondering, can you expand a little on communities that might be more vulnerable than others based on socioeconomic status, geographic location, proximity to high population centers?
I'm not totally sure that I can just yet. I think we're in a really exciting time of plastics research, particularly. I look at very, very small plastics, things that are the size of a pencil eraser down to about the thickness of a human hair. So my research areas are very hyper-specific, but we see these plastics everywhere, and the availability of data is growing day by day, and I feel like every day I'm learning something new about a potential effect or a threat by plastic. But when we do our research, we look at it in a wide scale of the greater Narragansett Bay watershed, and that is most of Rhode Island, parts of Massachusetts, parts of Connecticut, and our whole watershed. We're so dependent on Narragansett Bay for so many different resources. Our livelihood is so dependent upon it that I think in some way everybody within this watershed is vulnerable at some point to the effects of plastic pollution.
Anna, you did really wonderful work looking at the ingestion of plastics in wildlife here in Narragansett Bay. Could you, I know you've moved on to a new area looking at human health. Could you expand on that a little bit? What's the connection, what's the bridge between your work looking at plastics contamination in the food chain and how it's potentially impacting ultimately human health?
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of get back to Michaela's initial point about, you know, what word comes to mind when you think of plastic, the ubiquity of plastics in wildlife translates to ubiquity of plastics in our food and food sources, particularly of wild origin. And in many capacities, we don't yet have a great estimate of how much plastic we get from wild animals. Rhode Island and New England is a center for fisheries activity. We rely on fish. They're delicious. How many people in this room have had a lobster roll in the past year? I would raise my hand 1,000 times if I could. But the point being, what we find in the environment and what we find in wildlife translates to our own health because we are heavily reliant on animals for food. Microfibers are prolific in surface water environments, and they're really hard to measure sometimes as well. We have poor data surrounding how those get into fish tissues, how fish tissues then translate into exposure for humans. And when it comes down to it, when we're looking at vulnerable populations, we're not looking at, hey, are you dropping dead from plastic exposure? We need to figure out low-level chronic impacts that are hard to get at. And frankly, that's something that we are all likely vulnerable because we are inundated with plastics on a daily basis.
Yeah. Are microplastics getting into our tissues, into our blood, into our organ systems? And what, as these plastics break down in water, what are some of the chemical compounds that you're looking at, some of the potential deleterious chemicals that are entering our bodies?
Yeah, absolutely. So something I'm very actively working on is finding ways to best measure plastics in human tissues. This will also be able to translate to wildlife and other environmental kind of compartments, but we can definitively say, yes, we find plastics in human tissues. There's been some really headline sort of studies that have come out recently saying we found plastics in human poop, in placentas. We're working on finding them in other tissues, and it's a matter of when, not if, because these tiny, tiny plastics, they're hard to measure, and our analytical capacity is having to catch up with finding these tiny, tiny things in human tissues. Working with human subjects is also quite complex, so that certainly can be a limitation as well. But I am currently working on blood-based assays and placental assays to better figure that out. In terms of you know, what compounds we're concerned about, there are so many chemicals associated with plastics. We're speaking to the honors class earlier, and it's so complex and so diverse. It's not picking out, you know, the 5 or 6 recyclable polymers that you're used to seeing. It's those polymers plus hundreds of different flame retardants and plasticizers and additives and things that make them more stable that we have to tangle with when we're exposed to these particles. And in terms of exposure to phthalates and bisphenols and all this kind of range of things, we have some compelling and pretty scary evidence that suggests those things, again, we're not dropping dead from plastic exposure, but we are experiencing disruption of hormones associated with plastic exposure, which is a really big deal. Hormones mediate so much of development and growth and human function that we should be paying attention to that, absolutely.
Thank you. Kara, you've done some of the real seminal work in modeling longitudinally, with longitudinal sampling, the amount of plastic that humans as a large population are dumping into our oceans. We're now in an unprecedented period of time with COVID, and I'm really interested to learn what your views are on how the response by humanity to the pandemic, including the use of the masks that we all have either in our hands or pockets, are contributing to the problem, and where do you see this heading?
That is a great question. It is $1 million question, I think, for a lot of us working in this space. The pandemic has disrupted everything, and including the way that we use materials, including our waste stream. I don't think anybody would dispute that we are certainly producing more medical or protective waste, so masks and gloves, certainly lots of sort of necessary single-use plastic items are going into the waste stream, and there are people who are starting to model how much of that might be going into the ocean, but I think, or into the environment more generally. But there are other aspects too that we need to think about, like the fact that for at least a year or more, many of us went from a workplace to a home environment. So if you think about commercial waste or industrial waste, some of that has decreased while residential waste has increased. And it just takes time to sort of get these data and analyze what the trends are. One of the dangers is back to sort of the single-use plastic point about things like our nice reusable mugs and reusable takeout containers. I do worry that we've all fallen out of the habit, myself included, to bring some of these things out in public because we weren't allowed to for so long. So there is some ground that we're going to need to make up. But I think it's just too soon to say, have we doubled the amount of waste that we're producing? And but one thing I will say is that my colleague, Jenna Jambek, who does a lot of work on litter and solid waste, she's an environmental engineer. She runs the app, Marine Debris Tracker, where people can, if you walk around anywhere and see a piece of litter on the ground, you can log it. And so she has this database that's been going for more than a decade. And almost immediately when the pandemic hit, people started logging gloves and masks and other sort of pandemic-associated items. So there really is no doubt that this is having an impact, and we're seeing things on the ground that we didn't see before. But in terms of like a total mass, I think that the jury's out.
Eva, over the past 15 years or so, it seems to me that as a society, we've made lots of progress in education and in passing municipal legislation, for instance, or regulations on single-use plastics. And it also seems that a lot of this was undone in the past year or two with the COVID crisis. What's it going to take to, and can we regain 15 years of education without another 15 years of re-education? How do we move a society back to where we were, to pivot back where we were 2 years ago?
That is a big question. And I think if I knew the answer, I probably wouldn't have a job. But I think it really just comes down to exposure and like giving people the tools to empower them to make these changes. I mean, I myself, just as Kara said, like have had to get back into routine of like using my reusable mug when I go to a coffee shop and trying to cut down the single-use materials that have entered my life the past 2 years. But I think one thing that we're able to do, or am able to do working at a nonprofit, is provide experiences and places and opportunities for people to come and experience the natural environment in an enjoyable way. And hopefully by making those connections, and I think we've actually all experienced nature more so in the last 2 years than we have maybe before COVID, but like having that connection with the environment is going to instill a natural appreciation, I think, within all of us to continue to keep it clean. And one of the things that we focus at Clean Ocean Access, and something I'm passionate about in my personal life too, is environmental behavior change. And so behavior change doesn't happen, especially for environmental reasons, unless you have that connection to the natural environment. So by continuing to host beach cleanups, which is something that we do, inviting people to our beautiful coastlines, maybe that you've never experienced before, or a different part of the state that you live in. So giving those first-person experiences, I think, is going to be the way to continue moving forward. I might have another thought, but that's all that I have right now.
I did ask a big question. I'm wondering if any of you also have potential thoughts on how do we undo any unlearning that we've had for the past 2 years and get us back on track? Michaela?
Well, I don't know how much I can say that Eva didn't just say, but I'd like to believe that people haven't forgotten, that none of us have forgotten everything we've learned. And I think with COVID happening, a lot of our priorities had to shift. And I think that's okay, right? We had to change what we needed to do. And I think in a lot of situations early on in the pandemic, we needed to rely on single-use plastics. But the question we always ask is, in my personal belief, when you're thinking about plastics, what's essential and what's not? And we're not able to remove plastics out of our lives completely. Some people have, and it's incredible, but it's so hard. But, what are those non-essential things? What are those additional things? As we get back into the habit of bringing our mugs and our silverware, what other plastics are we using? And can we focus some of our attention on that until we're able to kind of bounce back?
Kara, you teach a lot of undergraduates out at sea, and you've been doing this for a while. So I hope, have been seeing trends over time in interest of undergraduates, such as we have here at URI. What are you seeing in terms of the trends amongst younger people who are facing this real reality, as we all are?
Well, we're fortunate at SEA, Sea Education Association, to attract students who I think are naturally interested in these kinds of problems. And I think a shift that I've seen in the time that I've been working there is that not only do the students want to do the research, they want to solve the problem. So this isn't just about learning for the sake of learning, which of course I fully support, but we increasingly talk about problems like ocean plastics or fishing, deep sea fishing, lots of different sort of environmental challenges in the ocean from multiple different perspectives. So understanding the science, but then understanding what are some of the interventions, how do we measure the success of those interventions? Do the interventions need to happen out in the open ocean, or are there things that we can do back on land in our own communities? And it's just such a rich topic, and I think we do get students who specifically want to come to SEA to go out into the ocean and see this problem firsthand and get that experience of towing a plankton net and picking out tiny little bits of plastic with tweezers at midnight while seasick. And we absolutely rely on those students and their passion, because we wouldn't have the kind of understanding we do without them.
So you're seeing some positive trends then?
Absolutely, and I think the students are as concerned or more concerned about climate change, right? It's not just plastics. But I think that among our young people, they're growing up in a different era where these are just problems that they know about. My 8-year-old and 12-year-old know about these things, and not just because I harp on it. They're learning about these issues at school, and they're real issues they're going to have to deal with as they get older.
Yeah. I'd like to ask each of you kind of like an existential question. There are so many issues that we're facing as a society: political, cultural, racial, medical, the list goes on. Why should we be spending the time that we spend thinking about plastics? how does this fit into the larger panoply of issues that we're facing? Why should it be prioritized? Eva?
All right, so from my perspective, from a lot of environmental public health issues, like plastic pollution is a tangible issue that someone can experience and see. Especially if you live along the coastline, it's sort of less tangible if you don't live near a body of water. So in that sense, I think that, in my mind, I think plastic pollution is something we're going to be thinking about and working on for the rest of time, because we're living in an actual experiment, because we're unsure of the effects of what it's going to have on public health, what it's going to do to our waterways, how it's going to influence our drinking water supplies. But in that case, like, if you just focus on the negative, it's horrible. But I kind of think of it as like a catalyst for positive change. Like, I've seen so many people get so frustrated by plastic pollution and litter, and it causes them to form a club at a university, or they want to attend a committee meeting or go to a town council meeting. And it's causing a lot of activism that I see that's been trickling upstream to where we now have policies in place that are literally addressing single-use plastic issues at the municipal and also moving to the state levels. So I think that it can be a model for addressing other issues that might already be doing something similar, but that's me trying to remain positive about the entire issue.
Thank you. Anna, anything to add to that? And could you also make the direct link for us between plastic pollution and climate change?
Yeah, so excellent answer. Thank you so much for that. I think to add on that, something that really motivates me to study plastic pollution as well as general marine pollution issues and just pollution issues overall is this link that all of these issues directly impact public and ecological health. Public health is reliant on ecological health. When we degrade our environment through plastics or climate change issues or chemical pollution. I also study a group of compounds called PFAS, or per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. These are all limbs on the same tree in that we are degrading the very resources that we rely on as a functioning society and overall ecosphere. And so these issues just maintain such relevance and importance when I think about the countless lives and livelihoods and people's happiness that rely on being healthy and capable of finding clean water and food. We need these things to continue on our, in our great global human experiment. It keeps me up at night, but it also, the importance of this general issue of public health means that we're going to continue to find a solution. We're going to get there. If there was a beginning to this problem, there's going to be an end because we are resolved to find it. The stakes are just too great not to. Yeah.
Thank you. Michaela, we talked about this a little bit at dinner, and I'd love for you to say a little bit more. What do we mean by biodegradable? What are biodegradable plastics? Is that a thing? And what kind of agreement or disagreement is there now in the field?
That's a great question. And I think it depends on who you ask. But right, we have this, so what's the most concise way to answer that? So I think when many of us think of plastics, we think of maybe 5 or 6 different types of polymers. And if you're me, you learned about those polymers from recycling and the little number in a triangle on the back of like a box or a cup, or you said this is HDPE, this is polystyrene. We think of plastics kind of in this way often, but really there are dozens and dozens of different types of polymers, and often a lot of things we make aren't composed of just one polymer, they're composed of many. And a lot of material scientists and chemists have tried to say, okay, well, we know that we are making these single-use plastics and they're not degrading. What can we make instead? And a lot of people have shifted onto bioplastics. So these are plastics that maybe, or plastics that aren't made with petroleum, but they're made in some sort of plant-based structure. But the name can be sort of a misnomer depending on how it's made. Bioplastic doesn't have a set definition, and depending on what it's made of, what additives are in there, dyes, other things, these things can last in the environment just as long as a normal plastic. So we were talking about at dinner, I think there's this idea of greenwashing where we hear something like the word bio and we think it's inherently better because of that word bio in front of plastic, but that might not necessarily be true, and that's a huge data gap that we have right now, figuring out exactly how long plastics survive, bioplastics, and what conditions are needed to actually degrade these items.
Kara, anything to add?
Yes. So 100% agree with what you said about bioplastics, Michaela, and this is just such a source of confusion. When I think of biodegradable, what that means to me is that the material can be completely metabolized by microorganisms. So all of the carbon in that material is used and none remains at the end of that process. And so there are some materials that are designed to fully biodegrade, but really in industrial composting applications, or systems rather. So that doesn't mean you could throw this compostable fork in your backyard bin and expect it to go away in any length of time. So I think it's challenging when I would love to have a magic material that would degrade back down to its basic components no matter where in the environment we threw it. But the fact is it's a complicated biochemical process. It depends on the environmental conditions. And so right now, I think if we are talking about compostable products, we need to think about having the infrastructure to actually have those degrade in a time period that it's designed for. And that also means having consumers understand when they're holding a compostable fork, they need to put it in a composting bin that goes to the industrial composting facility. Otherwise, it's either just more expensive trash or it's a contaminant in a recycling stream. So there is no concise answer to biodegradable and bioplastics, but it does speak to, innovation being one of the ways that we can start to address this problem. And there may very well be aspects of biodegradable plastics or bioplastics that have some net benefit, but we have to look at those very, very carefully.
So, interestingly, your comments really get to the heart of serious limitations in our recycling system in the country. We heard last week from Dr. Chelsea Rockman about efforts in California to reform their way of handling plastic pollution in that state. Getting back to New England and our region of the country, and maybe I'll ask each of you, what are some of the barriers? What are some of the potential solutions that you would like to see enacted locally?
Specifically with respect to recycling or just broadly?
Either broadly or specifically recycling, because we know that that's a very broken system at the moment.
Right, right. It is a broken system, and really this, it's not because the system was necessarily designed poorly, it's that we're asking the system to do so much. We have increasingly diverse types of plastics. We have increasingly complex products that are made of multiple types of materials, multi-layer films, and we're asking the system to take apart everything we've chucked into that blue bin and separate it by material type, which is becoming nearly impossible. So I think, some of these questions can't be addressed locally. I think one of the things that I would do is talk to my local material recovery facility and ask, and I have asked them these questions. Even years ago, I said, well, tell me where the number 3 through 7 plastics really go. You tell me they're being recycled, but who's taking them and what are they doing with them? And they, couldn't quite answer that question to my satisfaction. But the other pieces are, well, what would help you process the materials so the likelihood of them being recycled is better? And the answer is always, you need to know what belongs in the bin and what is creating a problem or contamination. So the garden hose can't go in there. The Christmas lights can't go in there. The lithium battery is downright dangerous. But also there are lots of different materials, packaging that you might think is recyclable, but it actually isn't. So I think there is, in the New England sort of local scene, we really need to make sure we know what our local facilities accept and make sure that we're not making the problem worse.
Eva, do you have anything to suggest for local action, local issues?
Yeah, I think about recycling a lot. It's a topic we talk about at Clean Ocean Access a lot. And I can speak to Rhode Island, so we have one central landfill. All of our recycling goes to the materials recycling facility that is next to the landfill in Johnston. So when we don't recycle right, a lot of our recycling ends up going into the landfill. So when the trucks arrive, they are inspected. So if they're over a certain level of contamination, that entire truckload of recycling goes into the landfill, which is what we're trying to prevent by recycling. So in my perspective, a lot of it comes down to education awareness and individuals making sure that they're separating their recycling correctly. But in my mind, I don't think of recycling as the answer. It's sort of like the last defense. And so one of the things that we've been trying to introduce through one of our projects at Clean Ocean Access called Healthy Soils, Healthy Seas, Rhode Island, is getting people to think about all of their waste, not just their plastic waste, by getting residents and households and businesses to start composting. So separating our food waste from our recycling and then having as little trash as possible. And going through that method, I think you realize that a lot of your recycling is still made up of single-use materials. So like if you use plastic water bottles, if you are going to Dunkin' Donuts and getting your iced coffee in a plastic cup, or Starbucks, where a lot of those recyclables that could become potential contaminants could actually be stripped from that waste stream if we choose to use reusables or reuse those single-use materials more than once. So we try to educate across the entire waste stream, as well as teach people what are the correct items to recycle, and knowing that if you do travel a lot, recycling is different from state to state. But I'll give a plug for the Rhode Island Resource Recovery. They have a really amazing A to Z tool on their website. So if you can literally type in any product and it will let you know if it's accepted in the MRF system. So if you didn't know it was available, I would definitely check it out. So.
That's hugely helpful. That's great for all of us to know. Anna, you're doing really interesting work at Mount Sinai right now, creating a library of chemical fingerprints of different formulations of plastics. And when we were at dinner, I asked you the question, how's it going keeping up with new formulations that companies, large manufacturers like Nike, are coming out with? How's it going? Can you keep up with it? What are some of the barriers? What do you think companies should be disclosing? And do you see any perhaps regulatory remedies that might be appropriate so that we know what's getting into our waste stream?
Peter, you asked the right panelists this question. So it's going okay. It's not going great. We're not keeping up. Something that appears in plastics as well as chemical pollution is the folks who are producing these are one step ahead of the folks who have to characterize it in the environment and try to do some risk assessment about it. And so while we have great fingerprints of some of the most common types of polymers, and we can certainly work ahead with that information, the diversity of materials that we are tasked to recycle and deal with is just astounding. As Kara already touched upon, the recycling system has such a tough job ahead of it to deal with just this mess of polymer. So it's not going that great. I think to get behind that. Something that is, I'm not sure is well appreciative is in this recycling infrastructure, probably the only folks who know what is in your product are the folks who produced it. So that makes it really tough on recyclers to adequately and completely carry out a recycling process. And so I think from a regulatory perspective, it would be so helpful if there was increased transparency of polymer creation and product formulation to maximize design to make sure that recyclability is attainable in municipal and in smaller facilities. You don't have to go to some large facility that can't accommodate very complex polymers. I think that's an important step. The other thing, kind of to loop back to the previous question just a little bit, is something within the recycling system that we need to appreciate is those recycled goods matter as long as there's a market for them on the backside of it. And so as consumers here in New England and elsewhere, so while we're dealing with this just diverse and complex system that we have to tangle with, we can act to ensure that we are using our consumer power to favor those goods that have a certain amount of recycled material in it, so that these producers and corporations have the incentive to figure out how to recycle their products and make sure that they have enough recycled material in those products to meet our demands. I think that's a really important component. Otherwise, plastic's really cheap to make. It's very expensive to recycle, and we need to keep that in mind as we continue to innovate within the recycling system.
Thank you. So we're getting close to the end of the hour, and I want to leave time for questions from the audience. So what I'd like to do is ask each of you to make a couple concluding remarks, and in those remarks include advice for us, for New Englanders living here and now. What should we do? What can we do? What action can we take? How do we get involved so that we're part of a larger solution? So, Kara, would you mind starting?
Sure. So, I started my work on this topic where I like to call the end of the pipe, the middle of the ocean, where we are finding tiny broken down bits of plastic, and my work has moved farther and farther upstream. And as I've moved along that value chain, I realize, as we've touched on a bit, that there are still a lot of knowledge gaps. There's a lot of research we'd like to do to fill those gaps, but I also realize that we know enough to act. And that action has to happen at all levels. There are discussions about an international treaty that will be held early next year, but this comes all the way down to the local level, and we've been talking a lot about what each of us can do. I think we can all be good stewards by making good purchasing choices and think about our behaviors. I strongly encourage everybody to do a personal waste audit to see what's in your trash and where might it go. And then I think, if you want to start thinking bigger, that's when you can start talking to your elected representatives, both at the municipal level, the state level, and the federal level. And I am very encouraged to see a lot more attention to this topic, not just in California, who are leading the way, for sure, but in many, many states. And I think New England is also on the leading edge. And where I live in Maine, we've just passed the first extended producer responsibility law for packaging. So that's an example of sort of leading behavior, or leading policy making at the state level. So I think you can operate from your own trash can up.
Michaela, any final thoughts and advice?
I'm always really encouraged when I meet other people doing microplastics research. It's such a huge field right now, and I think we were asked earlier today by a student in the honors colloquium class, doesn't it sometimes feel futile? But plastic is such a visual pollution. You can see it, it's there, it's made it very tangible for people, and I think it's really opened the door to a lot of conversations about pollution and what's in our local watershed. So I am really encouraged by the conversations that have happened because plastic pollution has sort of taken the limelight in terms of pollution. I think that in terms of, individual actions, I think, a cliche that's sort of said in this zero waste movement is that, zero waste won't be done perfectly by any person. We all have to do it imperfectly, and no one will be able to remove all plastic or from their lives or be the perfect recycler, but we have to try, and it's going to be through those actions. I think at the local level, we were talking earlier today about town by town bans on single-use plastic bags or straws, things like that. I think also keeping in touch with elected officials and letting them know that this is a priority, I think that has a huge impact as well.
Thank you. Anna?
Yeah, excellent responses. Hard to follow. I think, as I hoped I've reiterated a little bit, this issue, there's so much actionable room and space for us to move at an individual all the way up to a federal level. And it's worth moving because this is a public health issue at the root of it. We are talking about exposure and occurrence of these materials in the environment, and yet this all loops back to us. This is a public health issue at its basis, and we can't forget that. It's really easy to look at a picture of a seabird with a ton of plastic in it on a faraway island, but truth is, right here in New England, we see that same plastic ingestion and occurrence in our own environments, in our own seafood, in our own products. And frankly, I want to be able to tell my kids someday, we did something about this, we're acting, and we're trying to remove that risk from future generations. So maybe not a laundry list of to-dos, but maybe a motivation for us to take away tonight.
Eva, how can we get involved?
Yeah, so I would say I'm a firm believer in the bottom-up approach, so every step really starts with us and our individual actions of what we choose to do. And in that case, I would say, I think it's, my job is quite literally to work with the community and share ways that people can make more environmentally friendly behavior changes. So if you're unsure or you're stuck or you're not quite sure what to do, I would reach out to local organizations and see how you can get involved, but also think about sort of what you're doing in your daily lives that you might be able to do a little different, and pick one thing that you could change and start there. And then once you've made that change, see what the next thing is you can do. I am not 100% zero waste sustainable human, and I am still working as well to make sure that the choices and the products that I use every day are environmentally friendly, are compostable, are recyclable. But no one is perfect, and we're really all trying to work on this together. So that is my advice.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you. This has been really interesting. I'm wondering if there are any questions from the audience. We're just waiting for a microphone.
About 65 years ago, my mother couldn't afford to buy coal to heat our house. So at that time, she took everything that was combustible, put it in the furnace, and then my father cut up some tires. Now the tires made it so hot in that furnace that everything really burnt very well. We didn't see too much smoke coming out. Yeah, once the chimney was clean. There's not a lot of, can't we figure out how to make the plastics that are burnable? Can we, I'd like to tell a tenant, okay, we'll pay you $5 a month to go in the recycle bin, because that recycle bin is going to go and be incinerated and create energy somewhere. We could probably create energy as we burn. So this will be a fuel. So if you can find a positive effect, rather than trying to convince the government to do anything, I'd like to be able to burn them. So let's just have everyone make plastics that are burnable, and then with appropriate filters on the chimney somewhere, maybe. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, so I think we can all agree that burning tires are not the best idea, but what about burning, incinerating plastics? What's wrong with it? Can we get to a point where we can incinerate safely?
Yeah, so they burn well because they're oil. We're essentially taking petroleum products and they burn very well. I'm gonna take the first stab at this in that I grew up very close to a waste-to-energy plant in Chester, outside of Philadelphia. It's a plant where they do a lot of material recovery and a lot of trash burning. Some of it ends up being recyclable materials that get burned. Because we create plastic products that are so full of so many other things besides those petroleum base, we add all sorts of chemicals to them. We often don't require the maximum filtration on those stacks coming out of those plants. That community has incredible rates of cancer and asthma associated with that waste-to-energy plant. So while it's an awesome idea, and I think we need to innovate to get there, right now we still need to develop technologies to make it safe. Right now, no one really wants that technology in their backyard because of the associated health issues associated with that capacity. It's an awesome idea, and I hope we get there, but we need to make sure that we're not harming other folks by taking that route in terms of incineration.
Kara?
Yeah, I just want to add also that, if we burn our plastic waste, that does give us one additional use in that we're getting fuel out of it. But ideally, we really want to capture more of that value to be used over and over and over again. So in the same way that I would love to have a magical material that would biodegrade in any environment, I would love even more to have a magical material that we could recycle infinitely, so that we only have to take the resource out once and then build the material and build the product in such a way that we can recapture it at the end of its life and then turn that into something new. So that's really getting towards the circular economy, which is a phrase that you hear a lot now, not just applied to plastics, but generally applied to resources.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Hi, thank you so much to the panelists for a very interesting talk and sort of discussion. I guess I'm curious, as I was listening to you, to what extent have we had a fundamental, or to what extent can we have a conversation fundamentally about consumption? Because recycling and composting only goes so far, but the economics of the problem means that consumption is kind of at the root of a lot of the things that we're talking about in terms of plastics. So where are we at with that?
Thanks. Michaela, what do you think?
Oh gosh. I think that's an awesome question. I think that's the question we're all sort of circling around, right? I read this really great quote the other day from a scientific communicator, and I forget the researcher's name, so I'll have to look it up and yell it. But she was recently just quoted as saying, in regards of plastic pollution, synonymous to a bathtub. If a bathtub is overflowing, what do you do first? You don't grab the mop to mop it up. You turn off the tap. And we kind of need to think about, we spend a lot of time looking at cleanup and how to remove it, but how do we prevent any future plastic from going into our waterways? How do we prevent more plastic pollution being created? And I think that's sort of what you're getting at here, is that we could clean everything up now, but if we don't have resources to kind of change what we're consuming, what we're creating, and what those things are made out of, then we're not going to get very far.
Eva, do you have any thoughts? So I'm thinking that we have two major problems leading to rampant consumption. One is in textiles, the fast fashion movement, where we're buying way more clothes that are mostly made of plastic than any human could possibly use or need. We also have most of our plastics still made from polymers that are produced by oil companies that may not be selling as much gasoline for cars as we move to an electric fleet. I sincerely doubt that the stockholders of those companies are going to be happy with decreased oil sales. So how do we get out of this cycle? What's the way that we can move out of that vicious circle?
Well, something I think about a lot is extended producer responsibility. So putting a lot of the responsibility back on the companies that are producing our products, which I think a lot are starting to do. They have sustainability plans that are 5 to 10 years out, which seems pretty far, but it's going to be sooner rather than later, and making steps to either make their products of more recycled materials, so feeding into this like circular nature instead of this linear product production where things are produced and then just thrown away. So I guess in my mind, that's what I would like to see. But then also the consumers like demanding for products that are made more sustainably, but in a way that our infrastructure can support. So a lot of companies are moving to the bioplastic, compostable plastic route, which I personally don't think that is the answer. It needs to be something a little bit more accessible and actually reusable. So,
yeah. We have time for one more question.
All right, I have a question. So my question is, it's the holidays, and this is a time when everybody's thinking about buying and giving gifts. Any suggestions for how we celebrate during this time without buying more stuff? I think the reduce, reuse, or refuse. Any tips for people that are thinking about this time of year? Thank you.
I can just say that in our family, we are trying to move towards gifts of experiences rather than stuff. So that's one way. Now, that is a challenge with an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old sometimes. And then my other tidbit is don't buy wrapping paper that has foil because you can't recycle it.
I would echo the same thing. That's something in my family and friend circle, trying to gift experiences or like hey, I'm going to cook you a meal for the week. I know you're super busy. Those kind of gifts rather than something that they're just going to maybe give away or not, it's going to sit on the shelf and collect dust. And this, I think, kind of arose out of me being lazy wrapping presents, but now in my family, we wrap all of our presents with towels. And my mom hates it, but I love it. It works really well. And that eliminates the need for some of the wrapping paper waste that we have a big family. It just got huge trash bags of stuff that we're hoping was recycled, but not really sure. And so now we wrap with towels, and it works. We have lots of different size towels, and we don't have that gigantic bag of wrapping paper waste at the end of it.
It's a great idea. Eva?
I said my mind went to wrapping paper. I was thinking of newspapers too. It's another option, or paper bags. I used to wrap my textbooks in paper bags growing up, which is funny to think about now. So one of the things that we're promoting through Clean Ocean Access is actually giving the gift of composting. So you can buy gift certificates to family members or friends and help them start collecting their food waste at home, working with one of the companies that we partner with through our Healthy Soils, Healthy Seas project. So just sort of thinking outside of the box of ways that you can give in a zero waste manner.
Thank you. Michaela?
I think more and more I see a lot of cool things on the market, such as wrapping paper and children's toys that are made from post-consumer recycled products. And I think that's a really cool way to put if you're going to be spending money on a gift, putting your money behind something that is made from post-recycled materials. It increases the want for those materials. It sends a signal to whoever's producing these materials that they are valuable. And I think, if you have the choice between two objects and one is made with post-consumer recycled products, or, you think one will have a longer lifeline or, won't be thrown out within 30 seconds of opening, I think it's great if you can be conscientious about those choices.
Thank you. I do think we're out of time. I really want to thank our wonderful, talented, brilliant panel for coming and sharing your experience and wisdom tonight. And thank you all for attending, and those of you who are tuning in from your computers at home. Thank you. Good night.
And just a reminder that next week, next week, we've got Wallace J. Nichols for an ocean state of mind in crisis opportunities. So look forward to seeing you here.